Welcome, everybody, to No Driving Gloves. You have John and Derek tonight. Will's tied up in his shop. He's got a deadline. If a couple things got put off when he was doing the Rocket Racing Wheels Camaro, and he's trying to play catch up now for some of his other clients. And we, we totally understand. Hope you can deal without Will's humor again tonight. But I bet you he's going to have some stories for us right around the corner. Also, hope you enjoy the two episodes now that have released of No Driving Gloves News. We're working on getting some more news articles and getting things posted every week. If you haven't taken a listen to the No Driving Gloves News, it's going to be either a Thursday or a Friday release. You can kind of consider it a Thursday release. And it'll just be about 10 minutes hitting the top news stories of the week, automobile wise, trying to with a focus on collectibles, but it will also hit some street rod stuff, and it will also cover some modern automotive. This week we mentioned something about a class action lawsuit and the Ford sales numbers and that, but also a little touch on the Goodwood Festival of Speed and the hill climb. So, Derek, you've been gone for a couple of weeks too. What you got anything going on, or is it just a bucket of museum work?
Yeah, I don't really have a lot going well, I shouldn't say I don't have a lot going on. I got a lot going on, but it's mostly been a lot of work. I've been traveling for work quite a bit, so on some of the trips, it's hard to load up all the podcasting stuff and take it with you. But this week I was able to, so I'm actually recording from the road up in Ohio. We were on a what we call Museum in Motion tour with some of our Corvette Museum members up to the Detroit area. And I had a good time touring places like Henry Ford Museum and some of the Roush performance facilities, Ken Lingenfelter's collection, and of course General Motors, some of their sites. We got some behind the scene tours at. So that was pretty fun for our group. Other than that, John, I think as everybody knows, and as you well know, that I'm basically exactly 1 month away from the wedding. So a lot of wedding planning going on, which is keeping my life at a steady pace of faster than I can keep up with. Yeah, it's just been a lot of work, but also some personal, just running around and doing as much as I can.
Kind of know the feeling. As I mentioned in the news article or the news episode, I was supposed to be in Goodwood today, playing there, but personal life gets in the way. I got stuck here. Zara will probably join us for an episode here in a week or two, and she'll fill you in. She got her BRZ back from the body shop. A couple of little problems with it, but it happens every time. Aim the headlights and where'd this snap ring come from? It doesn't look like it belongs on this car. A couple things like that, but you get that every body shop, and they did a nice job on the paint. She's got this funky Subaru blue, but that's about all the kind of car stuff I've done. Say, just other than the stuff at work, which I really don't need to bore you all the time on it. Putting the X180R together and playing a little bit with one of our new acquisitions, getting the body shipped off to a panel beater in the Northeast, and a couple of things like that. Trying to get some projects wrapped up and get some projects started, and seeing where it all goes. So that's kind of how I've fallen in or been playing with this. When we just have Derek and I, we try to like to keep some of the modern stuff for when Will's here, and we kind of got a backup of topics for when the three of us are together again. But I listen to a couple of podcasts that are three people, and there's regular absentee, and I hope everybody's forgiving of that. And
I'm not.
Derek's got to pick up because he's the one who usually comes up with this topic for him and I. But we actually sat and we figured, and part of the deal with the no driving gloves is we're going to do everything we want to do it just like we sat down and we're having a conversation, and that's what Derek and I just spent the last 20 minutes doing, having a conversation. Go, well, what do we really want to talk about? What do him and I having knowledge on that? Not going to say Will wouldn't interject. He'd probably have some interjections on the topic, but looking around, we came across an article that was put out by Haggerty on July 5th. Will modern cars be on restorable someday? And this is a question that gets posed to me all the time is, restoration. And it's it's a question that's existed in the 20, 25 years I've been in this career. Oh, you're not going to be able to restore this. Cars from the 80s can't be restored. Cars from the 70s can't be restored. And I wasn't around, but I'm sure in the 50s, people were saying, oh, we're not going to be able to restore these cars from the 1950s. Maybe not so, because there wasn't so much of the computer stuff. But this article from Hagerty kind of puts that right out in front of us. And will modern cars be unrestorable? Will the National Corvette Museum say with a we're going to go with the ZR1 because the mid-engine car I don't know if it's official or not, but say will a 2019 ZR1 be functional in 70 years at the National Corvette Museum? Will it be able to be saved? Will even a Lotus Elise or a Ferrari Enzo? We have a 918 in the museum, and a lot of the question is, what's going to become of this car in 50 years? How is that car going to hold up? Because I mean, everything on it's electronic. Will you be able to get batteries for it? Will you be able to update the electronics? And those are, I'm going to say, still some pretty big unknowns when it comes to it. What time has proven to me is I think it can with various technologies, as Derek and I will discuss. But I've babbled a little bit here. Where do you want to go on this topic, Derek, or what's your initial thoughts on it?
I do have a lot of concerns about this, especially in the museum world. We are constantly trying to preserve the artifacts, which includes the cars in the collection, make sure that down the road, these vehicles are going to be able to run again, do everything they're supposed to do when they come out of the factory. As I think all of us know, even from our daily lives of dealing with technology such as our computers at work or at home, anything that has computer technology, it can give us troubles, and a lot of it unfortunately is anymore made to be a throwaway item that when it goes bad you might as well throw it away and get something new, which is exactly the opposite of what a museum's trying to do. I mean, I have a lot of concerns that are we going to be able to preserve the computer system of a car long enough that in 100 years, in, as you say, John, in 2118, will the National Corvette Museum, believing that it still exists and everything goes well for 100 years, yeah, will they be able to get one of the ZR1s out and fire it up and have people be able to see what a 100-year-old car at that time, what it was like when it was new and how it ran? Believe it or not, I do a lot of reading on that. I do a lot of discussing with other museums and conservators in the field about, okay, yeah, we know how to handle old mechanical objects, cars from 100 years ago now, or we know how to preserve them and how to keep them running. This electronics thing is a whole new field. And how are we going to do that? Is it just that we're going to accept that those parts are what, for lack of a better term, I guess we would call expendable, and we'll find some way to work around them? Or are they, as the essentially brain of the object of the machine, is that the most important part to preserve and make sure it operates the car the way it's supposed to? So I probably spend way too much time thinking about that, especially now that I'm in a museum where we are concerned with preserving probably more computerized cars than just mechanical cars. The Corvette's only been around since 1953. We're dealing probably with more cars in our collection that are computerized than are just old mechanical, functioning vehicles. So I guess long-winded into a short-winded statement, I'm pretty concerned, John.
You bring up some good points, and I guess I think about it a lot from just, are we going to be able to keep these functional? And you think about it, are we going to be able to keep these functional the way they are today? It's interesting because, as I've mentioned in a couple of episodes, I have spent a little bit of the last couple of weeks playing with three quote new Model Ts, at least new to us. And these are 100-year-old cars. I mean, 1926, 1923, and 1916. These are 100-year-old cars, and they were state of the art technology when they came out, and they were Model Ts. So while we think of old South Bend lathes and old Bridgeport mills and cast iron tools, they last forever. These were products of Henry Ford too, and built as cheaply and as quickly as possible. I can play, well, it's a disposable society today, and things are different, and plastics go away, and the metal's thinner and things like that, which is kind of true. But these are, like I said, Model Ts. They were built to be driven and built to be patched and put together and run, but they weren't exactly Rolls-Royce cutting edge technology of the day either. But we've managed to keep up with it. And I think when we're looking back in 100 years, no, we'll take a Tesla of today. I think in 100 years there will be running Teslas. Now, of course, I'm a big believer in, and we've discussed, and the more I think about it, it's going to happen, and we're going to go to this autonomous pod society for transportation within the next 50 years or so. It's a whole nother show topic in that, but my thinking's that way. And cars on the road will be enjoyable. As far as, I guess they might not even be on the road. You'll have to go to a private racetrack or a private area to operate them. In the museum world, that's what you're going to have to do. And with the advent of Arduinos and Raspberry Pi computers and that's how these things are going to be powered. Because, I mean, you get a Raspberry Pi now that's just as powerful as the computer I bought in the year 2000. And, write simple code and make the thing work. And these little bits of technology I think, can be adapted to keep the cars running and functioning. But as Derek said, is the car the brain? I mean, Tesla with, say, its level 3 autonomous, and Cadillac coming out with a level 5 autonomous car in a couple of years, those are living beings, really. And Derek's right. Is that ECU the car? Can you I'm going like Buck Rogers and Twiggy and that. Is there a personality to them, and is that Knight Rider? There you go. Was KITT the Trans Am, or was KITT the circuit board in it? And I think that's where Derek's thinking, and that's probably the decision. Right now the discussion is what makes a car real. If you got a D-type Jaguar, what makes that a D-type Jaguar? Is it the fender? Is it the VIN number? Is it the steering wheel? Is it a factor that determine what makes a D-type Jaguar a D-type Jaguar? What makes a Porsche a Porsche? It's a VIN plate. What makes a Lotus a Lotus? It's the serial number plate. In the future, is it going to be what defines X car? Is it the personality? Is it the computer, or is it the serial number, or are they one? So
Yeah.
now we're all philosophical.
Well, yeah, and that's at least I think in the museum world, that's one of the odd places we go sometimes is the philosophy behind it. I guess I don't see it as being too terribly different from, let's take Bentley Old Number One, which is the Bentley race car that raced at the Brooklands and places like that, and was a championship car. I mean, just set records, did all those things. And over time, of course, and you can do this with probably 100 plus other race cars. But over time, the engine's taken out because it wears out, and they throw another one in it and they keep racing it. Well, then it gets wrecked. Okay, well, the wrecked body comes off, a different body goes on. Well, now we get another wreck or something happens and the chassis gets tweaked. So let's take the chassis out and put another chassis under it. And eventually we get the original parts of the famed race car whichever one we're talking about, doesn't matter. All of a sudden, the frame of that car is in another car, the body's on another car, and the engine's in another car. Now you've got three cars that have parts, all have part. Which one is the original car? Which part gets to carry that life on? Is it the engine because it's the part that did the work? Is it the chassis because that is the backbone of the skeleton of the thing? Or is it the body because that's what the appearance was when the car did all the record setting, driving, and things like that? And I think it's the same with the computer unit in any of these cars. At the National Corvette Museum, we had the sinkhole. Everybody knows about the sinkhole. We had 8 cars fall into a sinkhole. They were all recovered. 3 of them were restored, and 5 of them have not been. One of those is a ruby red 40th anniversary Corvette. It's essentially damaged beyond repair. We'll call it that. Porter of the museum felt bad that we had lost cars in the sinkhole, and they owned another 40th anniversary ruby red Corvette, pretty much identical to the one that we had and have in the collection that fell in the sinkhole. So they decided to donate the car. So we would have as it came from factory, 40th anniversary ruby red Corvette, and because we had the one lost to the sinkhole. The only problem with it was the computer was having a few issues. Preservation team at the museum, this was before I was there, not saying that I would have done things differently, but just recognizing those people, decided that they were interested to see if the computer unit from this car that fell in the sinkhole still operated. So they took it out, took the one out of the one that was donated and put it in, and sure enough, it still operates just as it would have before the car fell into the sinkhole. And the car that was donated now, was running just fine on the computer from the sinkhole car. So the question becomes, now that the computer from the sinkhole car is in the other car, is that car in some way kind of part of the sinkhole car now? Like, where does this kind of philosophical debate end? It's probably way beyond anything any other just car collector would think about, but it is the way we go in the museum world, which is when you take any original component of a vehicle off of it and put it on another one, what is that doing to the authenticity and the history of those vehicles?
We kind of joke at because we have the John Surtees Ferrari 158 Formula One car that he won the world championship in 1964. While we were having the restoration done of this car, and kind of like Derek, before I was with the museum, this was being done, and it was being done by the work was being done by, I believe it was Sport Auto in Italy. Does a lot of Ferrari restorations supported by the factory, etc. But they were doing all of this work, and they said, we could build a second car. We've had to make these castings for the uprights. We've had to make all of these pieces. It wouldn't be that much more difficult to build a second car if you would want a second car. So you don't have to race the original or whatever you want to do. You would have a replica. And we were able to secure another 1964 Ferrari V8 that was, age appropriate, everything. And it's just not the chassis number, tied to Surtees for the championship. So we elected to have a replica made. And of course, in the museum, if you've ever visited the museum, we have the original car displayed in Ferrari racing red, and we have the replica done in a blue and white, the NART colors, North American Racing Team, because as the story goes, it's a little sidetracked. There was a issue at Le Mans with Ferrari, and the Ferrari cars were disqualified from Le Mans. And because of that, Ferrari pulled his cars, or Enzo pulled his cars from every form of racing that season. But this was at the very tail end of the season. Surtees was campaigning for a world championship, and he could win it. And he was able to talk Enzo into selling his Formula One car to Luigi Chinetti up in New York and running it under the North American Racing Team colors. And that's how the season finished. The last four races, the car was run in blue and white, only for factory Ferrari to ever campaign that way in Formula One. And a lot of little ties to that. And Surtees won the championship. That's a long story to get to my short little point here. That 1964 Ferrari also carries the first Momo steering wheel ever made. And for the longest time, that steering wheel, that original 1964 steering wheel, was on the replica. And when John visited the museum once, he noticed it and he kind of objected to that and said, that needs to go on my car. And we, kind of joked with him. He was kind of serious, or he was serious, put it that way, no kind of about it. But we joked with him that, well, doesn't that make this an original car too? Because, like Derek just said, it has the steering wheel. And if you're familiar with 1960s Formula One racing, you have a driver, you have two fuel tanks, and you have a motor, and that's all you have. So the steering wheel, it was the brains behind this thing. It guided this missile, and that's what they were a bomb. And if it wasn't for that steering wheel, I mean, it was a bomb. So as Derek just alluded to, is that would have that made the car an original? What made the car an original? Or could we actually, could we go to Goodwood and say, hey, this is the correct car, it needs to, will you allow it to enter the Festival of Speed? We don't race our cars, so not the Festival of Speed, the revival, we don't race our cars, but those cars need to be original on track. And I've heard some discussions with the Duke of Richmond, which is formerly known as was formerly Lord March. And would you allow some of these replicas that Jaguar is making with the XKSSs and the lightweight E-types and things like that? Would you allow those to run because they're built new? And he's saying no. I'm kind of with a group of people that if you own the original car, maybe you should be allowed to campaign the replica, because I mean we're dealing with a world right now that there's a Ferrari going to, Ferrari just sold for 60-80 million dollars, I can't remember which, to a guy that sells floor mats, which I believe Derek has endorsed in the past. And we've got another Ferrari GTO going up to auction that's going to be, estimates could be $60 million. This is getting to be fine art. And no matter what you say, I mean, granted, IT people will just punch $100 million paintings, but, car guys have a little bit more respect for the art that they have. And do you really want to put $60 million out on a racetrack? But on the flip side, do you want to deprive the world of seeing that $60 million car run and what it sounds like and, relive history with it? I don't think we're doing a lot of discussion on will modern cars be unrestorable, but we're doing a lot of discussion on what is going to be, what constitutes originality in a car.
Well, I think we can flip it back to that discussion though, John, because now we've talked about if you take the computer out or have to work around it, is it still the original car? So, in that question, it's going to be a question of what does restored mean? And I guess this gets into a very possibly a deeper discussion than we can possibly have in one episode. We may have to do multiple episodes talking about restoration in general, because as you get into restoration, you have to replace things in some cases. Sheet metal rusts and you have to put new sheet metal in place to restore a car sometimes. The interiors break down over time. You have to put a new interior in. You try to match it as close as possible, obviously, but it is usually a new fabric that you put in. So, in the restoration end of things over the preservation end of things, where we kind of, I think we're headed in the beginning of this, in the future, will a current modern day car, 2018, be restorable? I guess in a not too deep of a dive yet, but a kind of just a quick answer to that would probably be yes. It's going to be restorable, which means somebody's going to be able to take a brand new Ferrari or a brand new the Corvette ZR1 that's out right now, or whatever car, the last Dodge Viper built, if it gets parked outside for the next 30 years and the paint's shot and the interior's shot and the electronics have been, chewed up by mice, you can always repair or replace the body panels, whether they're fiberglass or sheet metal or, aluminum, steel, whatever it is. You can always replace those. You can always replace the interior because we have the technology currently to do it, just like we had the technology 100 years ago to do what they were doing in cars. Then we pretty much can recreate that technology now. It's getting harder and harder, um, mainly because I don't think people want to put that much effort into it. We will be able to figure out a way to get around an electronics system, the computer system of a car. The article you mentioned earlier, John, from Haggerty, even talks about some kind of creative work now where there's was it like USB drives and things that can kind of override the computer systems and make the car run even without the computer system working. Um, Forgive me, I read through the article quickly and I don't remember every detail of it. I think on a kind of a very cursory top level look, we could say that yes, a modern car is going to be restorable in 100 years, or 50 years or whatever it is. But to me, it's that then twisting the question to, when you restore a car, what do you call restoring a car as to authenticity and originality? So if it's not running on the computer system it came out of the factory with, are you truly restoring it to what it's supposed to be? Maybe that's the bigger question here. I don't know. How do you feel about it, John?
Well, in listening to you discuss this at the beginning of the episode, I said I've been working on the X180R at work. Now, this is one of 5 cars, and it's basically a Lotus Esprit. These 5 cars share a thing with every road-going Lotus Esprit, and that's the ABS controller, which is no longer available. And it's an electronic system that if the ABS electronics decides to fail, you have no brakes. It's not that you have manual brakes or you don't have ABS. You have no brakes because just the way the electronics in the system works and the way it actuates the pumps, and you have no brakes. The only way, if you want to have a road going Esprit, these are the Stevens cars, 88 and beyond, is to go back and put a power brake system in the car. There's a gentleman that has fabricated and figured out how to pretty much do this as a bolt-in thing, utilizing some Tilton master cylinders and that. But you lose your ABS, but you keep the car on the road. Just about every restoration career I've had, even museum conservation careers I've had, you pick a point in time and you want to replicate that point in time. In a museum conservation, it's maybe a tragedy. When we did the Saturn V rocket, some of it was 1969, some of it was 1963, depending on the portion of the Saturn V that we were discussing. But you pick these snapshots in time. If it's for display only, which our X180R will be primarily display only. We're going to leave that ABS system intact. It still works, but the day it decides to fail, they don't give you any warning. They just fail and you hit something, especially since it's a race car and you're usually not driving it slow. So it's just a fact of life there that'll happen, but it keeps those pieces correct and displays everything the way it should be. The other four X180Rs that are in existence have the modification and they have braking systems that function. So ours being in its museum setting, it's being restored to that museum world to teach people history the way it is without altering it. And that's one belief I have when it comes to history. You don't alter it, you just live with the way it was. To take it to real southern roots, Dale Earnhardt never won a sprint car championship. Dale Earnhardt only won Winston Cup championships, maybe Grand National championships in his earlier days. You can't erase history, and that's what I think Derek and I are really taking this discussion to. And when we restore a car, because we're doing it from a museum standpoint, trying to teach you what the car was or what the artifact was, whether it was a car or in Lotus's case or Lotus case, an airplane motor or an electric vehicle or a boat, the Moonraker yachts, whatever you want. It needs to go back to the way it was presented at a certain point in time, and we'll tell you what that point in time is. I'm doing a car to the Targa Floria right now, and it's going to involve that rebodying half of the car and finding a motor the car hasn't run with in 50 or 60 years. We're going for that Targa Floria point in time, and you've got to make everything right. So I don't know if we've actually discussed, will modern cars be restorable? I think that's going to be a topic for another episode, but
Hey, I discussed it. I mean, I said at a top level glance, yes, they will be because but it's more of that deeper question of, I guess, what is the definition of restored?
yeah, we're answering the question: are we restoring cars? Are we preserving cars? Or are we? I think the way the Hegarty article's written, and in this conversation, I think we're answering the question: will modern cars be unrestorable? And I think people like Derek and I are going to do our best to make sure they're properly restored. What the Hegarty article really is asking is, or what I interpret it as, will modern cars be able to be operated in the future? And because they do allude to, you can replace a fuel injection system and put a Mega Squirt on there, or put a Holley electronic, injection system on there, which we've done it at work on a Lola replica. And, we have the stacks and everything, and it's a Holley fuel injection system. The Sinclair C5 we have at the museum, and I really want to find one and import one for myself because they're so much cheaper in England. I was just talking to a gentleman on Facebook about it yesterday. There's one of the things that turns me on about that is these cars with Arduinos and with modern battery technology and with modern electric motors. Look up Sinclair C5. This is one of the smallest electric cars ever, or actually smallest cars ever made. There's a whole menu on the Sinclair owner's website of all these parts you can print 3D. And I've discussed it before. I love 3D printing. It's one of my other hobbies. You can print all these, improvements or little things for it. And I think that's answering Hagerty's question, because they talk about 3D printers and, like I said, the computer systems, and you can make any part you want with a 3D printer, provided you've got enough money for the right 3D printer, or you sub it out to somebody, or laser cutters and things like that, because nobody does sand castings, etc. anymore. 3D printing has just made it accessible. In answer to the Hagerty article, which is where Derek and I started with this, I'm going to say, will modern cars be unrestorable? To answer that question, no, they won't. Will modern cars be, will modern cars be unrestorable? Yes, they will, except in the most strict sense of the most strict, how do I want to say that? I'm going to have to do a lot of editing here.
You're kind of confusing me here because you're going the opposite way I was. You're saying no, they're not going to be restorable?
No, I'm going to say that they are. Well, actually, I'm going to say no, they're not going to be restorable. People like Derek and I will do our best to preserve them and continue their operation. But to me, a restoration is not keeping the car operational. And that's what like I said, what I think the Haggerty question is will modern cars be able to be operated or continually operated? And yes, they will. The Ford Raptor that you're driving 40 years from now is not going to be the Ford Raptor you're driving today. It's going to have a different fuel injection system on it. It's going to have a different ECU. It's going to have a different, everything computer on that car will be operated differently. It'll be updated, circuitry or this universal ECU that people are going to be able to buy, and it'll operate these vehicles. But I don't think you'll see the Ford ECU being used except in those strict circumstances at the National Raptor Museum. A Corvette Stingray at the National Corvette Museum, yeah, they'll probably have 5 or 6 correct ECUs for a 2019 Corvette that will maintain that vehicle, but those ECUs will be treated like gold, kept in, a static proof vault or something because of the fragility those will have in 50 years. But it'll allow them to tell the story. The guy driving the 50-year-old 2019 Corvette in, 2069, no, his car won't have a lot of those original pieces on it. Numbers matching Corvette in 2069 is I'm going to say isn't going to exist. So did I answer that question, or did I just totally screw up everybody out there and we just all need a drink?
I fell asleep. What? Sorry. No. No, I think you've. I mean, I think we're both on the same page here, which is, and I said at a cursory level they're going to be restorable, but I will change that to say that I agree with you. In what I meant was they're still going to be operable. People are going to find a way to do that. Now, we're going to do our best to preserve them, as you say, in their factory condition. And that likely will mean that it's going to be hard to have a running one as it came out of factory at this point. Restorable in the way you and I would define it is probably going to be a no answer. And I think that's what you were saying.
Yeah, you said that in a lot fewer words than I did. Sorry for wasting 10 minutes of everybody's lives, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Hey, you drug out the episode, so we're good.
Maybe we answered that question, maybe we didn't. I don't think we answered it in nearly the way I imagined this conversation going. I guess we'll sit down with Will in an episode or 2 or 3 or at some point and discuss restoring modern cars and how we see that going in the future. Again, changing ECUs and fuel injection systems and tire technology and, composites and things like that.
Well, and I think it'll be interesting to get Will in on this conversation because he puts a lot of modern drivetrains with a lot of electronic components into his hot rods. To find out what probably the question I will ask him is, as the builder of these cars, what does he hope for these cars in the future? In other words, if he came back, if he was brought back to life in 2118 and one of his hot rods still existed in a museum, let's say, some museums like, hey, Big Oak Garage, an example of a hot rod they did, and it had electronic components because he put a modern crate engine in it with a lot of electronics, electronic gauges, things like that. As the man who built that car, how would he feel if he went to the museum and they were running it, but they had modified it to run and changed a bunch of stuff on it just to make it run? I think that would be the interesting question to ask, because both you and I know we try to capture that moment in time or the builder's original intent. So it would be interesting to hear from someone who is a builder of a vehicle that has electronic components,
Well,
what his
as you
thoughts
were
would be.
talking, I'm sitting here thinking, boy, you and I talk this one way to death. And the and I'm sorry, but the funny kid from Alabama who grew up in Alabama who lives in, a town of 12, or what was that, 12,000? I can't remember our population episode.
No, I've been there. It's
Um,
pretty close to
this
12.
is the guy who's taking apart modern electronic shifters and modern fuel injection systems and adapting them and making them work and working in ways they never were intended. To be honest, and this, I'm in the crazy John way that I work, this is a huge compliment to Will. He probably understands this better than 90% of the people out there because, like I said, I, I can't say it because I don't know if he wanted us to say it or discuss it, but one of the shifter linkages that he was building, I thought was as complex as could be. And oh, no, it's just a servo and it's just this and just that. And we're putting it in this. And okay. And, he moved electronic door handles from the GTR into the Dart we talk about so often. And, adapting all of this stuff that never, 65 Dart with GTR door handles that function. And I mean, everything in that car functions the way it's supposed to be. And it's like a car. Well, we started this conversation and I was saying, well, because Will isn't here, maybe Derek and I, now I'm finishing it going, now maybe Will needs to be in on this conversation because he understands how non-complex this complex stuff is.
You know, if he listens to this episode before the next time we record, he's going to have such a big head.
We have that video of you and him. He has a big head. His beard might contribute.
Well, that's true. Well, I think he grows the beard to try to balance
probably,
it out.
I'd go with that. But I think with that and complimenting Will, we're going to wrap up this episode for tonight. Maybe we answered your question. Maybe we didn't. Maybe we posed more. So, as I say all the time, shoot us an email, nodrivinggloves@gmail.com. Look us up on Facebook or Instagram, No Driving Gloves, all one word. Take a look at it. I mean, everything. Give us some topic ideas, too. There's got to be some things that you want us to talk about. And with that, I think we'll close up this evening and talk to you. And, well, I'll talk to you in 4 more days with a new episode of No Driving Gloves News. And Derek and I, and hopefully will be back in a week with a standard episode of NDG.
Yeah, but hopefully it'll be part 2 of this if Will's back, because that'll be fun.
We'll give it a try. That's it for tonight.
See you later.